last night, a city we all love, a city still working to keep safe from the coronavirus pandemic, to recover economically. What happened was reckless, inexcusable, and unacceptable. I want to be clear. Those who took part in the earlier demonstrations yesterday, peacefully and with respect for others and our city, are not the ones we are talking about here. We had 3 successful demonstrations yesterday where people expressed their outrage over the death of George Floyd without any violent or destructive acts. But I want you to look behind me. I asked our contractors who were here to board up these buildings to leave them uncovered so that the people of our city could see the destruction that took place. And this building, this is your building, put here to serve you, vandalized. Across the street, this morning I took a walk to survey the damage at Civic Center Park and around downtown. Across the street, the McNichols building, one of the very few Carnegie libraries in this nation, someone threw a Molotov cocktail to set it on fire last night. The Greek amphitheater defaced. Private buildings all over downtown severely damaged. People unnecessarily placed in harm's way during last night's activity. What does this mindless destruction achieve? What justice is served by breaking windows at the library or City Hall or the state capitol or the state Supreme Court building or on private businesses in downtown Denver just beginning to come back to life? Whose life are you honoring when you loot businesses in our city? Businesses already struggling to survive through one of the toughest times imaginable, something we've never seen in this nation and in our city. What change do you inspire by setting a car on fire, throwing rocks at police officers, or vandalizing people's property? When there are agitators with selfish motives and reckless intentions, hijacking demonstration and inciting violence with homemade explosives, rocks, bottles, graffiti, and vandalism, our officers will respond to maintain people's safety, to protect themselves, and to protect public and private property. The person who brought a crowbar last night wasn't thinking about George Floyd. Neither were the people who brought assault rifles and handguns, explosive bottles. They weren't thinking about George Floyd, nor those who brought baseball bats the night before. We cannot and we will not continue to put the lives of innocent residents and demonstrators, officers and safety officials, or anyone else at risk at the hands of people bent on destruction and criminal activity. In short, we have seen enough. We are not going to wait for these incidents to escalate any further, or God forbid someone loses their life before we take action. Again, we have seen enough. We have activated our Emergency Operations Center to support and monitor the public safety response to these demonstrations, as well as those that are planned over the next several days. We reached out to our regional law enforcement partners, and we've asked them to assist us with additional resources. They have agreed, and they are deploying resources to the city of Denver. We thank them. Before coming down here, I signed an emergency declaration, which frees up the city with additional resources to deal with the effects of these challenges brought on by these unlawful and violent protests. Tonight, effective at 8 p.m. and from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. through every night until Monday morning, a citywide curfew will be in effect for the city and county of Denver. If you are coming to Denver for one of the demonstrations scheduled for today, once 8 p.m. hits, our message is very simple: go home. If you are planning to come downtown tonight, stay home. We've also requested, and Governor Polis has authorized, and we thank him, by deploying the Colorado National Guard to support our efforts to maintain public safety and protect infrastructure and property in the downtown area. We had hoped that we would not have to take these steps, but the aggressive and dangerous actions taken by some individuals and groups under the cover of darkness has made it necessary. People have sacrificed over the last 6 weeks, over the last 3 months. People are hurting. We understand that. We have all done what we've had to do to properly and effectively deal with the presence of COVID-19. But today, unfortunately, because of the actions of a few, we have to pause the little steps that we've taken so that we can send a very strong message that their actions will not be tolerated in our city. We know there's been a lot of confusion and misinformation about the tactics of our Denver Police Department that they've had to deploy to address the acts of violence and destruction in our city. So I want to bring up our police chief, Chief PAZIN, who has worked around the clock to direct the troops and to keep this city safe, to give you more details. Chief PAZIN.
Mayor, thank you. I want to start off by saying a name, Mr. George Floyd, because during the last couple of days, that name has been forgotten by a handful of agitators who are attempting to hijack his life and memory in order to create harm to this community. I also want to commend the 3 peaceful protests that started yesterday. The vast majority of the demonstrators exercised their First Amendment right to have their voices heard in an effort to bring about positive change to our community. I want to thank the leaders of these successful and peaceful protests, Mr. Alberta Simmons, Mr. Tay Anderson, and Mr. Quincy Shannon, who organized and safely demonstrated what it means here in Denver. I also want to acknowledge the hard work of the women and men who are out there on the front line protecting this community. They do it with professionalism, dedication, courage, and they've exercised extreme patience and good judgment. The Denver Police Department respects the First Amendment and supports our community in their effort to voice their opinion. Our officers are here to help you to ensure your safety as you join together and march. That is and remains our primary goal with all demonstrations. Sadly, a few number of agitators are inciting violence and causing destruction in our community. Now, it is important to point this out. A few number of agitators are inciting violence. We do not want to paint with a broad brush. Just like we're talking about law enforcement, the vile actions of 4 officers in Minneapolis have caused great harm to this profession. And we stand with our arm extended, our hand open to work with this community to do better. And just like we demand better from our officers, we are asking the same from the peaceful demonstrators here in Denver. Help us keep this community safe. Don't allow these individual agitators to hijack your message. Don't allow them to scar this beautiful city that the people of Denver have built. Attempting to capitalize on this tragic killing of Mr. George Floyd to cause widespread damage in our city is nearly as inexcusable as the horrific killing itself. The damage to our businesses, to our city and state building, and our community is something that we all should not stand for. In addition to the property damage, a few number of agitators and instigators again chose to throw rocks, bottles, large fireworks at our officers. They showed up to what were intended to be peaceful protests with items you don't protest with. Crowbars are not part of a peaceful protest. Baseball bats are not part of a peaceful protest. And certainly, bringing handguns, assault rifles, and ammunition are not part of a peaceful protest. The women and men of the Denver Police Department, the Denver Sheriff's Department, the Denver Fire Department, and Denver Health Paramedics, along with our mutual aid partners, will not stand for it. And we ask the community, the peaceful protesters, the people of Denver, to not stand for or tolerate this type of behavior. We know that most of the protesters who are coming out to demonstrate are doing so the right way. We need your help to weed out those who are inciting violence. Please help us keep this city safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief PAZIN. I want to bring up our Director of Safety, Murphy Robinson.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I make an ask of you, let me share a demand that I have to make on myself. As a Denver native, an Afro-Latino, first-generation American, father, husband, let me assure you that I too have been angry this week. I too have shed tears. I too have lost sleep over the outrageous acts that has led to this painful loss. And let me tell you, the history of policing, particularly in Black communities, has a dark past. One that was preceded by discriminative policies that constantly showed disappropriation to impacted minorities, and especially communities of color. We are proud in Denver of the fundamental shifts in our system and the practices that we have implemented over the last decade, while there's always room to grow. As a safety director, I stand behind my convictions of what the badge does and should represent. So now I want to talk to my fellow millennials. To my fellow young people, I'm calling on you to help stop the violence. As we take over the leadership of this nation, we cannot repeat the mistakes of previous generations. Let us be the generation that comes together, that systematically moves the needle of bigotry, racism, and hatred. In order to do so, we must have a nonviolent approach that includes partnership with civil activism. Free speech and the right to assemble are an essential part of our democracy and our society. It is protected by our Constitution and coveted by those around the world. I take absolutely no issue with your right to assemble. I have no desire to tell you what you should say or what you should not say. Where we part ways is the destroying of city facilities and businesses that our brothers and sisters built in this city. Our businesses have already seen the impact and the hurt from the COVID-19 crisis. Let's not stigmatize all the officers that thereby fall prey to the same prejudicial behaviors that are exacted upon our community. And so I urge you, do not follow the actions of those who would hijack a moment of this change for the desires of violence and rage. Please refrain from being downtown this evening, as I and all those who work in the safety community have a duty to protect and preserve the sanctity of what this city is all about and the future of this great city as we want it to be. Please, 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 I plead with you, follow the instructions of our personnel that are working tirelessly to keep you safe and navigate this complexity in this community. I will also add this. I would be remiss if I didn't provide you a way to protest that didn't involve violence this evening. I have asked my team to launch a Zoom protest meeting that I will lead, and we will be able to protest together. We will be able to have conversations together about what we are seeing. And so go on our city website, go on our social media platform, or look on my social media at Murphy Robinson 3 on Twitter, and we will post that link. And I would ask that all of you join me on a Zoom online protest. But ladies and gentlemen, let's keep our city safe tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Murphy. And before we go to Q&A, I'm going to bring up our city attorney, KRISTIN Bronson.
Good afternoon. My name is KRISTIN Bronson. I'm the Denver City Attorney. I want to start by just reiterating what the mayor and the chief and Director Murphy Robinson have stated to this community. We know a lot of you in the community are hurting right now. We hear you, we see you, we stand with you. We understand your anger. Many of us expressed today our own personal anger and being sickened by the death and the methods that led to the death of George Floyd. But we cannot destroy our city. We cannot allow the destruction of businesses and city buildings and the violence to protesters and to other civilians in the area. The agitators who are vandalizing and looting are sending the wrong message. They are weakening the type of change that many of these protesters are so desperately seeking. Here in Denver, we have a long history of peaceful protest. We embrace the principles of the First Amendment, but we cannot tolerate lawlessness, and we will not tolerate lawlessness. To those seeking to create chaos and incite violence, we must show no margin. We must protect our city and keep its residents safe, and that is why the mayor has signed an order launching a citywide curfew beginning at 8 p.m. tonight. It will go tonight for the next 2 nights from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. Denver Municipal Code gives the mayor the authority to protect the immediate public health, safety, and welfare of our cities at times like this. So at 8 o'clock tonight and tomorrow night, please stay at home. The curfew is going to apply to everyone, but there are some exceptions, so I'd like to go through those now. Exceptions would include, of course, law enforcement doing their jobs, firefighters, medical personnel, the Colorado National Guard, members of the news media, people that are traveling to and from work, people that are traveling to and from the airport. The airport, of course, will remain open as well. People that are fleeing dangerous situations, people that are experiencing homelessness, or people who need medical care for themselves or their families. We understand that those individuals may need to be out tonight, but those are the limited exceptions. This applies to any place within the city that is accessible to the public. Roads, highways, parks, alleyways, driveways, sidewalks, vacant lots. Please respect the city's curfew. This applies to anyone, whether you're on foot or using any mode of transportation. If you are in violation of the 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew, and you are not on this limited list of exemptions, you will be in violation of the law. And make no mistake, we will be enforcing the curfew. Under our municipal code, you could face a fine of up to $999 or imprisonment of up to 300 days in jail. We recognize that this is a measure of last resort. In recent memory, we cannot remember a curfew such as this in our city, but we must and we will protect the city and its residents.
Thank you, KRISTIN, and we'll conclude with Q&A. But let me say that this was a very, very difficult decision. It kept me up all night. But I don't think we had any recourse but to institute the curfew and to do the other intermediate steps that we are taking, including calling for the National Guard and asking for our regional neighbors to help us with law enforcement. What we have all witnessed is certainly not Denver, and it's not acceptable in our city. Let me also share with you that I've had conversation throughout the night, last night and this morning, with mayors all over this country, from Los Angeles to Louisville, Kentucky, including Dallas and Houston, San Francisco, San Jose, Atlanta, Georgia, New York, where we talked about actions that are being taken. And two things are pretty clear. One, the patterns are very similar in terms of peaceful protests during the day, and at nighttime, it seems like there's a changeover in terms of the people who are showing up and trying to incite violence and destruction in our cities. And two, several of the cities are doing exactly what we've had to do, and that is to institute a curfew, call for the National Guard and additional law enforcement resources. And so we are in communication. We're all thinking about how we keep our people safe. And unfortunately, at a time that we're all trying to navigate the impacts of COVID-19, we have to take these type of very difficult and challenging steps to protect our people and to protect our law enforcement and to protect property. Let's open for question and answer. Yes.
Well, certainly we, as we referenced earlier, we do not want to paint a broad brush. We do not want to group folks together. We have individuals who are advancing a violent and destructive agenda, and they are hijacking the death, the tragedy, the loss of life of Mr. George Floyd. We want to identify each of these individuals and hold them accountable for their lawlessness and the destruction that they have caused to our community. Certainly.
DPD responded in a tweet about those foam projectiles, but then there was a city spokesperson who seemed to suggest that DPD had not fired those. What were those, and was DPD involved in firing those?
So there's been a misunderstanding or a misperception regarding less lethal munitions. The Denver Police Department utilizes pepper ball, and that is a lower level on our use of force continuum. That is to disperse crowds, that is to help reduce the number of hands-on or reduce the types of force that are used when individuals have to get close together. Above that use of force continuum, there is what's called a 40 millimeter less lethal projectile. These are foam canisters that are used both with OC spray. Again, this is when there is a higher level of force that is being used upon the officers. Active aggression, rocks being thrown at officers. This has enhanced capability, again, with that overall goal of keeping our community and our officers safe. Where the misunderstanding takes place is the term rubber bullets. Now, rubber bullets is an archaic piece of equipment that was widespread in the 60s and 70s. We do not utilize rubber bullets in the Denver Police Department, and nor have we for decades.
Do you know why the city spokesperson then said that you guys had not fired those?
It must be a misunderstanding, but we utilize pepper ball and 40 millimeter less lethal munitions.
Chief and Mayor, I have a question as well. So we were kind of in the same boat, albeit yesterday inside. We have peaceful protests just a few blocks away. We're talking about the curfew starting at 8 o'clock tonight. We all know the sun goes down, it's going to be different 5, different environment. What's going to be the difference between that curfew? The sun goes down Saturday night, restaurants are open, you're going to have more people. A lot of theaters are trying to achieve last night, as you well know.
You heard it. You heard the same thread through each one of these speeches. This city, the mayor, the safety department, and the police department respect people's First Amendment rights to gather, to assemble, to speak. And we need to balance that and give people those opportunities to do it peacefully without creating the harm, the destruction, and the safety concerns for the people of Denver and the people of Colorado. Utilizing this curfew tool, keeping peaceful protesters away from the agitators or assisting us in identifying these agitators is how we can ensure safety moving forward.
Chief, is that realistic though? I mean, again, the sun goes down, and I understand what you're saying, but is that realistic to separate the good from the bad?
We're asking the good to help us identify the bad. And if you can help further that message, that's how we do this, together. We've built this city together, and we will move forward together. And we need the good people, the protesters, the good protesters that want their message out there to help us. We are asking for their help in keeping this city safe and not allowing agitators to take over the message, to hijack the meaning and cause and intent behind what we need to do together to keep this community and this country safe.
Let me just add, and I could not say it better than what the chief just said. The only thing I'm going to add to that is that I have participated this morning in several Zoom calls with citizens, not government officials, folks who were out here yesterday marching, having their voices heard. We heard them, we saw them, we appreciated their respect, we appreciated this peaceful march, that demonstration that just took place across the park here. However, they were as indignant in terms of what happened last night as I was. And they asked what they can do. And folks have said, listen, you're going to see them talk about it on social media. They're going to begin pushing back and say, this is not who we are. This is not what we stand for. We do not destroy our city. We do not try to provoke violence or reaction from the police officers. We do what we can to have a peaceful demonstration, to have our voices heard. And as the chief pointed out, we cannot and should not allow for others to hijack that opportunity. And so that's an important message. We have had conversations this morning with restaurants. Again, we know what restaurants have gone through. While they understand this is a very difficult thing for them. This is their first weekend of being open since what, mid-March? Where we had orders going to play. And so they understand the difficulty. If they have patrons in their restaurants at 8 o'clock, obviously we want people to finish their meal and then to head home. And that's what we're asking folks to do. Go home tonight. And we will be enforcing the curfew in order to keep people safe in our city. National Guard is going to be in this area. It frees up our Denver police officer and our other regional partners to help us patrol and to enforce the curfew and other laws. Any other questions?
So we have individuals, including last night, who are arrested for arson, who are arrested for burglary, who are arrested for creating mischief, who are arrested criminal mischief, damage of property, both business and to our city and state buildings. We have individuals who are arrested for weapons violations, as we've demonstrated here. 3 assault rifles brought to what is supposed to be honoring the loss of life, the tragic and horrific loss of life. There's no place in the type of positive change that we need in our community and our entire country to bring violence, the instruments of violence. That should be a peaceful protest. Now, we certainly have folks that are coming from outside the metro area in order to further this type of destructive and violent behavior. And we will investigate, follow up, and hold people accountable for the laws that they violate in our community.